Um, all right, so I would like to do three dedications. There were three people that I know that passed away this week. So the first dedication is there's a close friend of Lance Berlewitz's daughter, Rivka, who passed away. His name was Simcha Schneider. I think he was about 22 years old. Quite a
Yes.
fit guy. I'm not sure what happened, but obviously Lance's daughter is devastated. They were very close. So long life to the family. And I'd also like to wish long life to Kalman Zad on the passing of his father Alec, which the funeral was today. And also for Karen Oshry on the passing of her mother Moira. Her mother lived to the ripe old age of 99. I was in my 20s and her mother was in
Jesus.
the 70s. And I'm in my 50s. So 99. That's quite something. Um, so just a wonderful, wonderful innings. And just it's life we don't know. Some people can live till 99, some people till 22. The main thing is, please God, this is an aliyah for the neshama, and that we use every
Amen.
day to increase our and improve the world, increase our growth, our learning, the mitzvot that we do, our connection to others, and not waste any moment of our lives. And I wish all you guys bracha, by the way, really long life and good health to you.
Kam lecha.
All right, so before we get started, I know Arthur is got a clown soon. Kevin, would you like to teach us before we get started?
Sure.
Thanks.
Okay. So, um, something about, and we may have touched on this a while back, but it's always good to revisit um, interpersonal relations and how to communicate, how to talk to people. So, one of the prohibitions, serious prohibitions, is ona'at devarim, which is causing emotional pain through words. And practical examples, and Bava Metzia mentions it. And one of the things is it refers to verbal wrongdoing, hurting others emotionally, and practically it's also reminding someone of their past. If someone's about Shuvah and they used to go clubbing and they used to eat the biggest treif, you can't remind them and say, "How was the cheeseburger? How were the langoustines in your youth?" You can't. Uh, they can discuss it with you, obviously, but you shouldn't bring it up with them if it's going to embarrass them. Um, and another thing, interesting thing is making someone feel unwelcome, like snubbing people. And we all, I'm sure, have experienced that. And it's being nasty to people for no reason because you think they're not on your level, we're better than them, etc. That's also falls within that scope, according to my notes here. And yeah, it says lastly, it's taken even more seriously than monetary matters, monetary oppression, because people can always they can always pay back debts, but once people have been hurt by a comment, uh, psychologically, it could have a long-term effect before that water flows under the bridge, so to speak. And so yeah, that's about it. Yeah.
Good, good. Thank you, Kev. Really appreciate it. All right. So if we go back to the Gemara, we're on 8b1. We on the second part of the daf, and there are the the first version that was cited was this rule of a person being cut off with kares with regards to a voluntary act of tumah as well as an involuntary act of tumah. Um, and that was related to, are you protected under the guise, and is chopping wood in a forest considered preparation to a mitzvah, an actual mitzvah itself? We dealt with that. But the Gemara cites another version of the previous discussion which relates to Rava's statement to the laws of the sabbatical year rather than exile. So if you remember, it was brought because Abba Shaul said that the example of a person chopping wood in the forest teaches us something else. Just as chopping wood is a voluntary act, so too any act causing death must be voluntary in order for the law of exile to apply. So obviously that would exclude um, um, mitzvah-based activities, such as the Mishnah uses the father who hits his son and inadvertently kills him, and the teacher who chastises his pupil and inadvertently kills him, and the agent of the court who's trying to subpoena an individual and uses a bit of force, reasonable force, but nothing abusive, or somebody that's an agent of the court that implements lashes as per the court's derivative, ensuring they've done a health assessment, etc., and it's certainly no head trauma wound. So all of those killed while performing a mitzvah are exempt from going in exile if the person inadvertently dies. And the discussion that occurred was Rava turned around and said, "Look, at the end of the day, he responded to Ravina and he said, this word asher basically it comes to imply that you want to enter the forest, great. You don't want to enter the forest, great. And therefore, it can't refer to a mitzvah obligation such as chopping wood for a sukkah or for the altar to have the wood, because then you don't have an option and you would be protected under that particular guise. But since you can buy wood and the mitzvah isn't to chop wood, it's to build a sukkah with the wood you've had chopped. So if you were in an area where there was nobody that you could buy wood from, fine, that would protect you apart from the poor individual in the forest. But why take on the risk yourself then? For a couple of shekels you can have the wood chopped on your behalf and you wouldn't be susceptible to any sort of risk. So now there's another interpretation of how these laws can be applied, and it relates to the sabbatical year rather than exile. Okay, but thematically it's the same. So there are those who teach this discussion in regard to the following, and there's a pasuk. If you look at the pasuk, it's actually a Mishnah from Shavuos. It's in chapter 1, and it's an issue where Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael debate the meaning of this verse. And that verse is in Shmot, chapter 34, verse 21. For those that don't know what Shmot is, listening in the shir, it's Exodus. So it says, 6 days you shall work, and on the seventh day you shall rest. During the plowing and the reaping you shall rest. So although the verse as a whole refers to Shabbat, it's difficult to understand why the Torah should single out two of these labors that are almost agricultural in phenomenon, that of plowing and reaping, from all the other 39 forbidden labors. Okay, so Rabbi Akiva therefore is using this and saying, look, it's not talking about Shabbat, it's talking about the sabbatical year, not about the Sabbath, and therefore he talks about that you find it with regards to the Shemitah. So according to him, the verse means that though generally you can plow and reap during the first 6 days of the week, the sabbatical year you can't plow during the first 6 days of the week because uh, you can't touch that particular ground for plowing or reaping, and that's Rashi's explanation of Rabbi Akiva. Is that when you want to merge the two and you want to take the sabbatical aspect and the Shemitah year aspect and the sabbatical year aspect, it means then even during the week where you would be permitted on a non-sabbatical year, you can't plow or reap. Rabbi Yishmael finds the verse has relevance mainly to Shabbat, and he doesn't see it as odd that it uses two examples of plowing and reaping and wants to make an inference in terms of the sabbatical year. He said, let's talk about Shabbos. Okay, so let's just see where their argument actually rests. So with that pasuk, it's basically unnecessary to speak of the prohibition against plowing in the sabbatical year or reaping in the sabbatical year, because it's already been said in that verse, you shall not sow your field, nor shall you prune your vineyard. So, in other words, what Rabbi Akiva is starting to say is, why would you interpret um, this concept at being about Shabbat? Because if you can derive it from Shmot, Exodus chapter 34, verse 21, um, you don't need to derive it from there. Where you actually derive it from is in Vayikra in Leviticus chapter 25, verse 4. In other words, it's saying the same thing. It says, you shall not sow your field, nor shall you prune your vineyard. So if it says that in Vayikra uh, chapter 25, then you don't necessarily need that verse in Exodus to tell you the exact same thing. So let me just clear up where they're holding. So what he's saying is that the verse prohibits even plowing down on. So he's saying, look, it's doing more than just saying that, um, talking about a Shabbos issue and a sabbatical year issue. He's saying, listen, you don't, because there's a repetition between Vayikra and Shmot, you don't have to learn that during the Shemitah year for 6 days, even if it's not Shabbos, you can't reap or plow. It's obvious. What it's coming to do is teach you something a little bit different. And that is, during the 7 years, you cannot touch the produce. You can't sow, you can't plow. You can't plow the land in order to get the soil soft to drop your seeds. You can't sow, you can't reap, you can't harvest, you can't do any of these things. So for the 7 years, you know that. It mentions it in the pasuk. There's nothing there that you have to know. So the entire reason that there's a repetition between Leviticus and Shmot is because it's coming to teach you something else. In other words, it's talking about pre-sabbatical and post-sabbatical. Guys, just give me a second. So, what it's doing is it's saying something a little bit more subtle. That if you look in Vayikra, which comes after Shmot, after Exodus, is that it says to you that the verse prohibits the plowing done on the eve of the sabbatical year, not on the eve of Shabbat, meaning the 6th day. So it means, in other words, at the end of the 6th year. So the you so you can't derive any benefit even entering into the sabbatical year. So it means the 6th year, you can't do any plowing to get the ground ready, nor can you sow the seeds. Now, the reaping that would occur after the 7 years in the 8th year, which is known as the post-sabbatical year, you can't do that either. Okay. I'm sure that makes sense. And that's from Rabbi Akiva's perspective. Now, Rav Yishmael says that it actually just refers to Shabbat. It doesn't have anything to do with the Shemitah year or the sabbatical year. And it purely teaches that just as plowing is a voluntary act, never connected to a mitzvah obligation, so too the reaping refers in the verse is also voluntary. And in other words, that is the reason why it's prohibited on Shabbos, but this excludes from the prohibition of reaping on the Sabbath if you're cutting the grain used for the Omer offering, which is a mitzvah requirement. So basically, he's saying as follows that if you have a look, um, that the Gemara prohibits planting, but it doesn't prohibit plowing or reaping in the sabbatical year. Um, let me just try and keep it a little bit simple. All right, so the Omer offering is a mincha meal offering. It's made of barley flour. It's brought on the 2nd day of Pesach. So all it's saying is that you need a new crop of the year, and it's cut before immediately the night before the offering. So according to Rav Yishmael, it's cut even if that night is the Erev Shabbat, and you're already in Shabbos. It's the only time it's obligatory. If it's anything other than that Omer offering, it then becomes voluntary. I'm going to connect it to Rava. Can any of you guys give it back to me so far?
Just a point. I can't give it back, but so because the Shabbos was discussed in Shmot and Vayikras after Shmot, it can't be relating to Shabbos. It's talking about it's relating to the Shemitah year. That's what you said. Is that right? Is that
Uh,
what the argument is? An argument is about as well.
so it's a bit more complicated than that. Um,
Yeah.
just what did your other guys derive? Simpson's dollar, anybody? I know Arthur's teaching now. I mean,
I'm listening, but I'm not in a state to give it over. Sorry. Yeah.
Gav, the other Gavin.
Yeah, same. Yeah,
I can't hear you.
I'm saying also can't give it over.
No, that's all right. We're all old. We all got brain fog. It's delightful. We've got the best years behind us, and we've got everything to look forward to. Shady Pines. Uh, like, all right. So I'm just gonna let's just make this very, very clear. I'm gonna ask you guys a question. Why does the Gemara bring this up even? This issue with sabbatical year versus the Sabbath. What is it even trying to prove?
Uh, can I have a go?
Yeah, sure.
If someone doesn't uh, rest their lands and their orchards and that, and maybe that's they're liable to penalty or punishment. Maybe that's what relates to Makkot.
No, no, no. So what we're going
The-
to do is we're going to show how, just like the case of getting karasa for tuma, whether it's obligatory tuma or voluntary, at which it's not mitzvah based. In other words, the rectification isn't a mitzvah based because you got yourself into that chosen state by certain activities. But bearing a corpse is not voluntary because you have to do it even if you're the Kohen Gadol. It makes an analogy between almost having, it states in that case where you thought you would have had protection if it's involuntary because you needed to do that, and therefore, how come you could still get kares and get malchus? And the answer was quite clearly, as Gavin Simpson suggested, that your rectification process to enter the temple is voluntary, but you have to have certain steps made beforehand um, of waiting for the immersion to the next day and doing your animal sacrifices before you be in a state of readiness. And if you don't do that, you're culpable, which is proving Rava's point that you're culpable anytime something's voluntary, and if it's involuntary, well then you're covered. But chopping of the wood for a sukkah is not the mitzvah; it's preparation for a mitzvah. Bar chopped wood, build the sukkah. That's it. So here it's going to make a similar inference with Rabbi Yishmael. But before we get there, you've got to know the difference between what Rabbi Akiva says and Rabbi Yishmael. So, in a nutshell, Rabbi Akiva is saying that this cannot be talking about Shabbat itself. And the reason he's saying that is because there are two times that this is mentioned. If you look in Shemot chapter 34, verse 21, which is Exodus, where it's mentioned before, 6 days shall you work, and on the seventh day you shall rest. During the plowing and reaping you shall rest. So he says, listen, it's very, very straightforward. There are 39 forbidden activities. Why mention plowing or reaping? It's got to be an analogy to something sabbatical, but not the seventh day of Shabbos. He said it has to do with agriculture. And what's the agricultural connection with any activity that's sabbatical? It could be literally what happens during Shabbos that you can't plow or reap or plant or harvest. But because it mentions only those two specifically and not within the context of 39, now why did it single out those two? Because it's talking about the Shemitah year, the agricultural year. And he said, I'll give you another proof. When you look at Vayikra chapter 25 and 24, it says, do not reap the aftergrowth of your harvest, nor pick grapes. So he's saying, look, at the end of the day, you already know you already know that it's prohibited from Vayikra. So why mention it in Exodus and Vayikra? You know about the sabbatical year. It's mentioning it twice. He's saying you have to glean something out from it. And what are we gleaning? Is you would have thought just like you don't break the 39 melachos during the 6 days and the agricultural prohibitions during the seventh year. You don't break it during just like you don't break it during Shabbos, you don't break it the seventh year. We don't need to be told that. We've been told that twice. What we have to learn is that entering the sabbatical year, you prohibit it. So in the sixth year, you can't start to almost plow so that you can just chuck in your seeds just prior to the seventh year and think you can derive benefit in the interim. It's entering into that sabbatical Shemitah period of the seventh year. Nor can you reap in the eighth year on almost the Havdalah period where Shabbos is over for the Shemitah year. It would be the eighth year. When you're entering the eighth year, you can't reap. You have to keep those constraints, and therefore he says we're talking about the Shemitah year and not Shabbat itself. And
Just recap, just
yeah.
Damon, sorry. From from the from exactly when in the 6th year to exactly when in the 8th year do you have to refrain from all of this?
Okay.
When you mean right at the end, are you talking the last 3 months and the first 3 months of the farming period that you can't plant seeds in the beginning? Or what's the exact time frame? Is there an exact time frame or not? Or do they just say it like that?
So, okay, the seventh year is out of bounds. What you're
Yeah.
asking is, does it mean the whole 6th year is cancelled and the whole 8th year is cancelled? I don't think so, because the reality is it's almost talking about uh, towards that like Shkia time where you don't quite know if it's Shabbos. So to me, it would imply only the last maybe the that last period just before you enter into the seventh year. And with regards to when it's finishing, when it describes it almost as like a Havdalah process, it doesn't mean the whole of Sunday. It implies like just Motzei Shabbos, like for a short period of time. So in terms of is that X amount of days or X amount of months, it can't be the whole 6th year, seventh year, and 8th year, Gavin. I agree with you.
No,
I need to
it's three
ask Rabbi
years. It would
Goldschmidt or
be
Rabbi
two.
Cohen.
Yeah. Listen, because what I'm thinking is if it takes 6 months for a plant to grow, I mean for the agricultural to grow, whatever he's going to plant there, then obviously you can't start it 6 months before. Then you'll have to start it a year before because otherwise it's only going to grow during the Shemitah year. So I think it depends on what you're going to grow. That might be for the beginning part, and then for the end part, that's what I'm thinking. Whatever you're going to grow, if you can grow something in 3 months and be finished before the Shemitah year, then maybe you're okay. And then I'm thinking to start has only got to do with the planting. So when can you actually plant? Because you obviously can't plant in the or can you start planting at the end of the seventh year? And if it's only going to be ready in 6 months, I
So
don't think so because
it would be
you
in two
can't work the field.
Masechtas, Gav. It would be obviously in Shavuos and Moed Katan. It's in the third daf of Moed Katan, and in Shavuos, it's the whole book is dedicated to those specifics. You know what I'm saying? So it would be there. I don't know. The only thing we have to understand now is Rabbi Akiva is saying, just know that before we enter into the seventh, at the end cusp of the sixth, and when we finish the seventh year at the beginning of the eighth. So you can't plow at the end of the sixth and you can't reap at the beginning of the eighth. In terms of for how long, I don't know. So as long as you understand that concept,
Yeah, no, got you.
that's what Rabbi Akiva is saying. It's talking about the Shemitah year. It's not talking about the Sabbath. And he says because there's a duplication in Vayikra, Leviticus, and with 25 verse 25, verse 4 and 5, chapter 25, verse 4 and 5, and he says in Shmot, chapter 34, verse 21, he says there's an overlap. So it's not going to teach you the obvious law again and again. You're deriving something else from it. And he says the very fact that it mentions two other melachos can't just be relating to Shabbos, but more of a sabbatical sort of theme. Otherwise, it wouldn't just relay plowing and reaping. It could talk about extinguishing a fire and lighting a fire. He said there's a reason it's speaking about that. So that's Rabbi Akiva's opinion. Rabbi Yishmael is saying something different. I just want to cover something. And what he's saying is, look, it's purely talking about Shabbat. And he's saying that what you've got to understand is that basically it's not talking about the sabbatical year. And plowing is a voluntary act. And it's never connected to a mitzvah obligation, ever. If you look at reaping in the verse, it refers only to reaping which is voluntary. So in other words, any plowing or any reaping, you can't do it during Shabbat at all. Okay? The only exception is when you're given a commandment, and the only commandment which takes precedence over Shabbos is this Omer offering. Because with this particular Omer offering, it basically has to, even if you cut it on Erev Shabbat, it has to be, it's a meal offering made of barley flour, and it has to be brought on the second day of Pesach. So it has to be from a new crop as well of that year. So it even supersedes Shabbat. It's the only commandment that would supersede Shabbat because it's a commandment that allows you to make it involuntary and therefore commit that during Shabbat. And we're going to see how it's related now.
So
But
there's not any Shabbat. That's only the Shabbos just before Pesach. It's not every Shabbos he's talking
correct,
about, right?
it would be like on first night Pesach, for example. It would, if, for example, first night was on Shabbos, and you needed for the second day offering, you could even harvest it during that because it's the only time you get the new crop. Yes, but it's only in that circumstance. Nothing to do with personal gain. Okay? So far it's very straightforward. Nothing. So all he's saying is there it's not voluntary. It's a mitzvah to do it. But every other case, you have got no jurisdiction to break Shabbos. So this is where we're going to get to our point now. Rav Yishmael was questioned because a certain rabbi asked Rava, because it's making the same analogy as to the Tumah Tara thing. Okay, so the certain rabbi, doesn't mention which one, said to Rava, why do you assume that the plowing to which the verse refers to is a voluntary act and never for the sake of a mitzvah obligation? Perhaps it refers to the plowing done to prepare grain for the Omer offering, which is a mitzvah obligation, and still the merciful one said, you shall rest. In other words, you shall refrain from such plowing because it's prohibited, and if plowing is prohibited on the Shabbat, even for the sake of a mitzvah, then the reaping must be similarly prohibited. So what this rabbi asked Rava is, look, you assuming that when you say that plowing is prohibited, that it's a voluntary act. So just like you can reap, and we know you can reap for the Omer offering, why can't you, for example, plow from the Omer offering if you don't have another crop? And yet Hashem says you've got to rest. You have to refrain. You have to refrain from plowing. So Rava answered him, is because look, most likely you would find fields that are already plowed. You don't have to plow. It's pretty likely that the ground has been softened, but because it's the new crop, you're not going to find a case where the fields have already been reaped from the new crop. They might not have grown yet. I'll give you that much. So then if they haven't grown yet and you've got land already plowed, then fine. There's no obligation. You've already plowed land. So that's question, because Ravina now has an issue with Rav on this thing. And he said, look, basically the bottom line of it is how this deals with it is Rava turns around and says quite clearly that you will only have this problem in reaping because it has to be from the new crop. Even if you've got a crop that's currently reaped or harvested, you need a new crop. So then you can break Shabbos in order for to use a new crop for harvesting. However, with regards to plowing, there's no such commandment because you should have planned better and you don't need a new crop. You should have had plowing land to have been available in order to do so. So you don't have to break Shabbos for the plowing aspect, just for the reaping. And if you say, well, what about the plowing? How are you going to plow and reap and grow the thing magically in one day? The commandment is the harvesting part, it's not the plowing. So Rava is saying to this rabbi, you're never going to have a situation where you have to break Shabbos in order to plow by another mitzvah. It's only reaping, because there's a time period between reaping and harvesting. And there wouldn't be such a case of plowing. Okay? So how does this relate? We've got 7 minutes left. Is Ravina challenged Rava on this exact sort of point, because he said, right. So the bottom line of it is, since there's only a case where if you so there's a mitzvah in terms of reaping. Okay, so then Ravina jumps on the bandwagon and says, because there is an opinion with Rava that said if there wasn't a field already plowed, you might have to plow it in a circumstance, but I can't see a particular reason. So Ravina hops on Rava and says, okay, so I want to convince you that there may be kids that don't have to be smacked. He's not actually bringing this part to people in a forest. He's saying there might be kids, Ravina is saying, that don't have to be smacked. They'll be good kids. Or you give them one zetz and it's enough for 5 years, and you all have to say is, I'm very disappointed in you. I expected so much higher from you, and that would suffice. So why, since you've got that case where you only have to chastise a student or your son or whatever the case may be because he's a good boy, why is it a mitzvah then to hit him? And then if somebody gets killed during that particular incident, you can turn around and say that wasn't part of chinuch, that wasn't part of education. You went a little bit excessive because this is a good boy. This boy doesn't need to be hit regularly. So you could use that same analogy of saying if you already plowed, you don't have to plow. But if you already reaped, because it has to be from the new crop, you do have to reap either way. But plowing not necessarily. But if you need to plow because you haven't pre-plowed, fine, if there's a circumstance like that. So what happens, Ravina said to Rava, is you've got a case where you don't need to hit the kid. You only have to hit a kid if it's a naughty. Do you see the analogy that he's making? What makes you think you have to smack him in this case? And since you don't have to smack him, and it's preparation for a mitzvah, just like plowing, a preparation to the education, and not part of the chinuch because he might not need it if you've already hit him once, what makes you think you've got to hit him again, and then the second or third time you inadvertently kill him? What makes you think under the guise of that mitzvah you protect it? Do you see Ravina's question to Rava, guys?
Yeah, I do.
So fine, the Gemara asks, okay, so you might not have an obligation to all children to hit or chastise them to the same degree, but it's still considered a mitzvah obligation. Meaning, Rava answers there, even if he learns his lesson there's still an obligation to hit him on occasion, because it's written, chastise your son and he will bring you rest. If you remember, that was from Proverbs, and there's this issue of spare the rod and spoil the child. So there's multiple Tehillim on it, and Proverbs, etc. So Rava offers another response to Ravina's challenge, and he said, look, you're going to get obviously a heck of a lot more out of it if the occasional beating is there, apart from some harsh words. So he says to Ravina, what I said to you is nothing. Rather is that the reaping mentioned in the verse is analogous to the plowing mentioned there. Just as in the case of plowing, if he found a field that was already plowed, he need not plow again for the sake of the mitzvah. So too the verse speaks only of such a case of reaping, where if there was found grain that was already reaped, he need not reap again for the mitzvah. But if you think that that verse refers to a mitzvah obligation as well, that if he found grain that was already reaped, he need not reap again, it's a mitzvah to reap and bring new grain, especially for the Omer, even if there's other grain available. So in other words, he's saying, no matter which way you look at it, I'm telling you that as far as reaping is concerned, it's obligatory. You have to do it no matter what, but not necessarily for plowing. And I want to make the analogy that chastising your son, if you go with Rabbi Ada's Abba, is exactly the same, is that you have a mitzvah to chastise your son, even if you think he doesn't need it and he's a good boy, because you're going to get extra oomph out of him. That's what Rabbi Cohen interpreted it as in his Daf Yomi Shur. So Rava and Ravina are two different opinions. Ravina is feeling that maybe one chastisement is enough, and you don't have to continue if it's a good son, and therefore if it's like a multiple occasion, you think you're going to be protected from exile for an inadvertent killing there, even if you didn't do any head trauma, but the person developed a clot on their thigh. You're not. It's exactly like the incident of plowing, that if you've already plowed, you don't have to. And Rava is saying it's like reaping, you still have to, like the new Omer offering, because it needs a new crop. You get the bottom line, we're done.
Yeah, I got it.
Any
Thanks.
questions, guys? It's pretty straightforward.
You said that
Say
the
again.
show would be a little bit shorter. You're right. It's 1 minute shorter. Thank you, Dan.
We aim to please.
Mr. Damon, just explain
Did
the
a good
last
job.
point you said. Reaping will be like a new crop.
No, so bottom
Explain.
line is you have to reap because it has to be a new crop. It doesn't matter if you previously reaped. And Rava is turning around and saying that's how you have to chastise your son. You think once is enough. You've got to use it according to the Pesukim, like from Tehillim, where it says you've got to regularly administer different forms of educational motivation. The carrot and the stick, pulling away privileges, occasional giving a putz. It's continuous. It's not like the plowing, like Ravina says that if you've plowed, you don't have to plow again, and if it's a good boy, it's fine. And therefore, they're talking about the inadvertent killing, how you're protected from exile, according to Rava, according to Ravina, not if you've done it and it's not necessary and it's part of the educational process past a certain point. Obviously, both agree abuse is not allowed. That's all I'm saying. That's the bottom
So,
line, guys. We finished the
so
session.
bottom line, this is more for Kevin. So, can you sow what you reap on Shabbos or not? Kevin,
If
it's
you
for
plow
you.
into your kid, yes.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
sorry, it's over my head too. Trust me, I just said
Okay.
it.